Hello, so time for the press preview. It's our first look at what is on the front pages of tomorrow's papers. And tonight we'll see what's making the headlines with the journalist and author Christina Patterson and the deputy editor of ConservativeHome, Henry Hill. A very good evening to both of you. We will chat in a moment after we've looked at those front pages, starting with The Observer, which combines the heatwave and the Tory leadership stories, with the minister who led the COP26 climate summit saying he'll resign if the new Prime Minister fails to commit to strong action against climate change. While the Sunday Express leads with Rishi Sunak pledging to scrap a mountain of EU red tape within 100 days if he is elected Prime Minister. That story also the main item on the front of the Sunday Telegraph. Meanwhile, the Sunday People has a story about rival candidate Penny Mordaunt's campaign funding. The Sunday Times also leads with Penny Mordaunt and leaked papers, which it says cast doubts on her claims that she has never supported watering down the rules on the process for gender transitioning. The Mirror reports that although Boris Johnson missed today's Cobra meeting on the heatwave emergency, he's still planning a party at Chequers to mark the end of his time as Prime Minister. And finally, The Star on Sunday tells us that the heatwave is likely to be followed by a baby boom. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you can see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us discussing them. And we're joined tonight by the journalist and author Christina Patterson and the deputy editor of ConservativeHome, Henry Hill. A very good evening to you both. Hope you're keeping cool this Saturday night. Lots to discuss. Let's start with the Sunday Times, shall we? They are saying that chaos looms as Britain faces the big 4-0. Christina, do you want to kick off things tonight?
Yes, well, I mean, it's funny. I was having a coffee this morning, and I sat next to at the next table. There were a couple of women saying, "Oh, people always make a fuss about the weather," and I thought, actually, 40 degrees is really very, very hot. I mean, that is, if we do go up to 40 degrees, and it's looking like it, that will be the hottest day ever recorded in this country. And although some of us enjoy the sunshine and the heat, this is very serious because even when it has been much less hot. I think last time it reached something like 38 degrees, I think about 1,400 people actually died as a result in the heat. And the predictions are that this will be very dangerous for health, even apparently for people who are actually, pretty healthy, and certainly older and vulnerable people will be more at risk. So it's very alarming. And anyone who thinks that climate change is a fiction really, really needs to, wake up and taste the coffee as these people sitting next to me were not doing this morning, because this is, I mean, we are in the heat wave that is going through Europe, the wildfires. This is really emergency stuff, and it shows we absolutely do have to take action now.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think, Henry, about some hospitals deciding to cancel routine appointments and surgeries? Also, some schools deciding to close on Monday and Tuesdays, nurseries as well. Is that sensible, or is it an overreaction?
I would absolutely not second guess medical professionals when they make decisions like this. I think the important thing to remember is that in other countries where hot weather like this is more normal, they do absolutely adapt their working day, their infrastructure, how they build their buildings. Everything is adapted around those temperatures. So I think that it would be risky and unwise because we don't normally get temperatures like this to say, oh, it's just a sunny day, let's keep doing everything as normal. It's probably sensible to take precautionary steps to try and reduce pressure on the NHS and emergency services so that people who are vulnerable and do need care need them. I think the bigger question is, if we're going to keep having days like this and more of them as years go by and summers start to get hotter and hotter, the question we need to start asking, politicians need to start asking quite quickly is, right, how do we start adapting to this? We're used to talking about how to insulate homes. When do we start talking about how to get homes cool, especially places like care homes where elderly people are? How do we put provisions in place to make sure that schools have go-to plans for not letting extended hot summers disrupt learning. I think, honestly, that's the debate we need to start having once, hopefully, we've got this immediate heatwave out of the way.
Yeah, which leads us nicely onto the front of the Observer, Christina. Alok Sharma has given them an exclusive interview, and what he says is quite interesting. He's warning that he could well quit if the new Prime Minister doesn't have the right climate credentials and decides to dump the net zero plan.
Yes, well, this is actually a really significant intervention because Alok Sharma worked incredibly hard on the COP 22. What's it called? Can't remember.
26.
Anyway,
26.
26. And I remember him talking movingly about. I think he cried at the end of it. I mean, he didn't get exactly the result he wanted because for all kinds of reasons. But he did. There was a certain degree of consensus. I think almost nobody now, or nobody sane, denies that climate change is real, that human caused climate change is real, and it is an emergency. And we absolutely have to work globally in cooperation with other countries and individually as nations to try to avert that emergency. And honestly, if you've been watching or reading about how the potential candidates, with the exception really of Rishi Sunak, I'm not sure where. I don't think that Tom Tugendhat, I'm not sure exactly where he stands on this, but then he hasn't got a hope in hell of becoming Prime Minister anyway. But the others have been sort of outvying each other in their desire to drop net zero targets, or at least action. And Kemi Badenoch actually said in the debate last night that it's more important. The economic crisis facing the country is more important. The economic crisis facing the country is extremely important, but pretty much nothing is more important than the climate emergency that the world is facing. So, I mean, I'm glad he's made this intervention, I hope, because these people are trying to please the 0.3% of the population who will be voting in the Tory party members. And unfortunately, a very high proportion of those seem to be in denial about climate change, or they don't care. But the rest of us do care. And if they want to have a future for their grandchildren, they should care. So well done, Alex.
Yes. Would you agree with that, Henry? Do you think the green agenda hasn't been getting enough prominence in the leadership debate, and do you think it is going to in the coming days?
I think it will certainly receive more attention. Kemi Badenoch, I think, went so far as to call net zero unilateral economic disarmament, which gives you a rough idea of the position of her intervention. But I think it's not really accurate to describe this as purely a problem of Tory candidates pitching to a small minority of activists who don't think climate change is real. I think actually there's a much, much bigger problem, and it's going to be a problem whether the Tories or Labour are in office, which is the long-term, very important work of pushing towards net zero and combating climate change is going to run headlong against the short-term imperatives of a cost of living crisis, which is fueled in large part by a crisis in global energy markets. Now, it's all very, it's not just a tiny minority of headbangers in the Conservative Party membership who are going to be demanding action which cuts across the net zero agenda. It's going to be everybody who wants subsidised fuel bills. It's going to be all the voters who expect the government to pull out all the stops to secure more energy, and that means at this point fossil fuels. In the long term, the net zero agenda is hugely important, and I support it. But things like nuclear energy, green and renewable energy, those have long lead-in times. And thanks to the war in Ukraine, we now have an acute crisis, which is only going to be bridged by fossil fuels. So I think it's a clear point of tension. I hope that we see more attention put onto it in the coming days. But I think it's important, just for the sake of actually getting to grips with the problem, to recognise the scale of the problem. This is not simply a tiny group of headbangers versus the rest of us. This is the economic interests of the short-term economic interests of most people versus the long-term interests of everybody.
OK, let's talk about another topic that the leadership hopefuls are wrestling with, gender identity. It's on the front of the Sunday Times. A lot of mudslinging in the Sunday papers, Christina. Penny Mordaunt, the front runner, but quite a lot of it aimed at her.
Yes, well, I have to say that about the only thing I had really registered with Penny Mordaunt, apart from the fact that she was keen to go on TV in a swimsuit, was her stance on self-ID for trans people. She had a very clear and firm stance on this, and it put her loggerheads with quite a lot of people who didn't share it. But, one could argue it was brave to do that. And when she was Equalities Minister, it was pretty clear that she was in favour of self-ID. Now that the candidates are fighting each other, and in particular Liz Truss and Penny Mordaunt, it seems that some papers have been unearthed, and we haven't seen them, so we can't comment on the accuracy or inaccuracy of this claim, that, let's just say, don't quite support her assertion in the debate on last night, and that she's been making in recent days, that she never supported self-ID. Certainly, Kemi Badenoch and officials in her department when she was there had the very strong impression that she did. So it does look as if she has changed her stance in order to appeal to Tory party members. And if we are actually meant to be, ringing the changes from a prime minister who flip-flops, we know that Dominic Cummings calls him the shopping trolley, and who is not always truthful, then this doesn't look like a very good start. In fact, it looks slightly continuity Boris Johnson. So let's see what emerges from it. But there are other assertions that have emerged in recent days about her time as a naval reservist. Apparently, people who are in the Navy have again suggested that she has overstated her position there, and sort of claimed to have a kind of military background that her record simply doesn't justify. So none of this is particularly working in her favour.
Okay, Henry?
I think this is always going to be a problem for Penny Mordaunt, is that her campaign, when it started, and it did have this spectacular launch, it was mostly, or at least in part, because she was a relatively unknown figure. She had a few things that tick the right boxes. She had been in cabinet. She's telegenic, but she was largely a blank slate, which means that Conservatives who were tired of Boris Johnson and all of the sleaze involved in the dying days of his administration could project onto her whatever they wanted. And there was always a question mark about whether or not, once she came under scrutiny and had to start having firm policy positions on things, she would be able to keep this up. Now, the trans issues is actually one area where, up until about a week ago, I would have said it was one of the few areas where she had staked out a distinctive and, perfectly honourable position, whether you agree with this or not. And I think that had she dug in and defended, yes, it would have alienated parts of the electorate. There's no doubt about that. But I think she might have actually come off better than what's happened. Now, we haven't seen these documents, but it certainly seems to be the case that several people who worked with her in government, including the Suella Braverman, who was the pregnant minister who was the reason for the legislation that they were debating, believe that she staked out a very firm position on this and is now backpedaling. And if you're already doing that on one issue, on 1 week of the leadership campaign, it's simply, notwithstanding the substance of the dispute, it doesn't show you to be a break from Boris Johnson.
Yeah, OK. Well, we'll speak more about the leadership contest in a moment. But for now, thank you both. Coming up, plenty more from the papers, including this spread in the Sunday Express. Truss, I'm the only candidate who can keep red wall votes. Talking about that and plenty more in a moment. Part two of the press preview, taking a look at Sunday's front pages. With me, Christina and Henry. Christina, why don't you start things off this half? Sunday Telegraph, Rishi Sunak trying to appeal to those Brexiteer MPs.
Yes, well, there's a Tory leadership competition going on when everybody vows to destroy red tape. If one single thing has massively increased the red tape in this country, it is, of course, Brexit, which Rishi Sunak supported. But he has to appeal, and he did, he has to appeal. He's in a strange position of having supported Brexit, but not being the most popular candidate with the right of the party. So he's now doing whatever he can to win the support of the right of the party, and is, of course, promising, a bonfire of red tape. I have to say that if he promises it, I would have a lot more faith in his promises than in any of the other candidates. Not because he's clearly the most serious candidate and gave by far the best performance in the debate last night and is by far the most competent of all of them, but also because he has a good record of getting things done. And I think he is, although I think it's a great shame that he supported Boris Johnson, and I think he is absolutely tainted by the lack of integrity of Boris Johnson. I do think basically he is a man of integrity, and I think if he says he'll do something, he'll probably try to do it. Whether he will get to be leader of the Tory party is another matter, because the Tory party members seem hell-bent on getting someone who's more right-wing. But, there may be a bonfire of red tape, but there will certainly not be a bonfire of Brexit red tape, unfortunately.
OK, we're slightly short of time, Henry, so I'm going to move on to the Sunday Express, their headline, Trust. I'm the only candidate who can keep red wall votes. Thoughts on this?
I mean, she keeps saying this. I'm not entirely sure what the evidence base for it is. The Tories actually have an incredibly difficult job to try at the next election to hold on to that extraordinarily broad coalition that Boris Johnson managed to build. They have to simultaneously try and hold on to the red wall, whilst also shoring up support in Liberal Democrat-facing seats in the South and the Southwest, which have traditionally been Conservative, are slightly better off and have been alienated by the party in recent years. Now, if Liz Truss has proof, actual polling evidence that she's popular in the red wall, I'd like to see it. But as far as I'm concerned, her campaign is basically cosplaying as Margaret Thatcher, and I can't think of anything that's less likely to woo voters who were attracted to Boris Johnson's promise of a new kind of conservatism.
All right, Christina, we'll finish with this. Underdog Tugendhat. He may be the underdog, but he did very well in the TV debate, didn't he?
Well, to be honest, I don't think he did nearly as well as Rishi Sunak. He seems like a nice bloke who has been untainted by this ghastly, corrupt, lying regime. And so he was free to do and say what he liked. So when he was asked whether Boris Johnson was a liar, as all the candidates were, he could just say yes, or rather, whether he tells the truth, he could just say no, and got applause for that. It's not like a great virtuoso performance. He was just able to speak the truth in the way that the other candidates aren't. You could see the audience warming to him. I warmed to him. As I say, he seems like a nice bloke. He's not going to be the next Prime Minister. He doesn't have the experience to be the next Prime Minister. So to be honest, it's not really relevant. But, he livens the debates up. So that's nice. OK. I'm going to ask you this both very quickly, just one answer each. Who do you think is going to get to the final two, Christina? Definitely Rishi Sunak. Well, not definitely anything, but Rishi Sunak, and I think Penny Mordaunt, but it's either Penny Mordaunt or Liz Truss, and I'm not sure at this point. Could be Liz Truss. All right, interesting. Henry?
Rishi Sunak, and I think Liz Truss, because I think that she can shore up enough votes on the right wing of the party that won't go to Penny.
All right, very interesting indeed. OK, thank you very much for your thoughts.